Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Today we're looking back at our high school years. This episode is a listener request, and we had so much fun reminiscing on what we were like, our clothes, our cars, our activities, and more. Join us as we talk about high school in the 80s and early 90s, a lifetime ago. Listeners, today we're taking you back in time, way back in time to our high school days. And this topic came about because of a voicemail message we got. Let's take a listen.
Hi, ladies. This is Francie, and I'm a big fan. I just love listening to you and all the wisdom and fun, and it's just a great time. I am curious if you guys would do a podcast about what you were like in high school. I would love to know all the details, like what kind of styles of clothing you wore, just your personality, what you were like, what cars you drove, what music you listened to, what your prom dresses look like, everything. I would just love to hear an episode where each of you share just kind of like your high school experience and what it was like. I'd love to hear about that. All right. Thank you. Bye.
All right, Julie and Mindy, what'd you think about Francie's message?
I'm wondering why she wants to know this.
Right. Is she writing an expose?
And I'm also fascinated because it's so fun to think back, kind of where we came from and led to where we are now. So,
She really wants the details.
She does. Some are foggy, some are clear. I don't know. How about you guys?
I do kind of cringe at thinking about having to actually go back to those days.
Right.
I would never want to repeat them, but I do have fond memories of that time. I mean, it was a good time. And, I got to go to high school in the 80s, the most fun time.
Well, I also went to high school in the 80s.
Okay.
But I think, because, and then you must have gone in the 90s, Mindy.
No, I was in the 90s, ladies.
Right.
So this is going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah. Well, we did each graduate a little different time period. So I'm interested to hear what you guys dealt with and what was going on with you. But none of us are the same people that we were back then. Thank goodness. But what comes to mind when you think way back to those days? Are those days remembered with fondness, or are they ones that you'd rather forget? And Julie, you said that you remember them with fondness.
Yeah. And like I said, I wouldn't actually want to relive those days, but, they were a significant part of my life and a lot of growth and change. And I'm glad I'm not that person anymore. I don't know. High school can be an awful place and a wonderful place within the same day.
Mm-hmm. Mindy, how about you? How do you remember it?
Wow. Well, okay. So I'll preface what I'm going to say is I went to 4 different high schools.
I was thinking that, Mindy. That's crazy.
So I literally was like 4 different people because all in the span of 4 years, I only lived 2 different places, but due to just other circumstances, I experienced a small private Christian school. I experienced homeschooling for the first time as a junior in high school. And I also experienced 2 different public schools.
Okay.
Wow.
So you ran the gamut there.
That's right. I sure did. Lots of experiences.
Yeah. There are parts that I'm fond of, and there are parts that are pretty cringeworthy. And I'll say this now,
Right.
and I'll say this later in the episode. I could not be happier that there wasn't social media. And I'm glad that the things just live in the recesses of our mind and not actually out there for public consumption. And I feel bad for high schoolers now that have to deal with social media because that would add in a whole nother layer of having to be cringeworthy later.
It is so true. But I don't know, have you guys reconnected with people from high school on Facebook? Because
Yes.
I have a lot of different old high school friends on Facebook.
Yeah, I think it's fun to see where people ended up living and their families and who they married and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
and the neat thing is I've reconnected with people in high school that I wouldn't have necessarily connected with in high school.
Right.
But kind of once all that junk is behind you, you're
Right.
a mature person now, you connect with different people,
It's true.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's talk about who we were in high school. And Julie, you asked us to describe if we fit a certain stereotype. So why don't you go first?
Exactly. Julie first.
Well, I was far from being the popular kid. In fact, most of my high school classmates might not remember me. But I did have a really small group of great friends, and then a bigger group of casual friends kind of from the activities that I was involved in. So I was the studious, shy type. I loved school.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a lot of time studying. So that was me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm really thinking, did she even have to study? Because I feel like it probably came pretty naturally.
Yes.
Yeah, but when you could get a 98 instead of a 96,
Okay.
that was me.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I didn't get the 100.
Julie, I needed more friends like you in high school.
All right. Well, Mindy, how would you describe yourself?
I don't think that I fit any one stereotype. I definitely got along with everyone. And later on, when we talk about the things that we were interested in, I really could flit from group to group to group, and but was also very selective with who my close friends were. So I got along with everyone, though.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I would say that, and it feels weird to say this now because does any teenager feel like this at the time? But I would say that I was popular. I was the kind of person who had fun, but also kept my grades up. I kind of rode the line between fitting in and staying in line, covering all my bases. All right. Well, if we looked back at our yearbooks, what pages would we find you on? What activities occupied most of your time?
Well, I was in the band, so I was in marching band and concert band. We kind of joked that we used to eat and sleep band. We had rehearsals most of the summer, 3 days a week after school, games on Friday nights, pep rallies, competitions on the weekend. Our band traveled all over the country. So band people kind of became my high school family, and that was really the best part of high school for me. It really pulled me out of my shell and got to meet a lot of great people and just have a really, learn a life skill that I still enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
I played varsity softball. I had to actually get my yearbook out to see some of this stuff. I was in the National Honor Society. I was in Modern Music Masters, which is a music honor society. I was in the Foreign Language Club, which I think I only joined because I heard they took a trip to Europe every year.
That's
because
perfect.
I don't remember anything about it. I also found myself on the Mu Alpha Theta page, which I had no idea what that was. And that was a group for the furtherance of mathematics.
Oh, wow.
Which is really funny because I don't even consider myself really great in math. But
okay.
I found myself on that page. And then outside of school, I played in a community orchestra, a community theater. I played piano and I played a lot of tennis.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay.
I was always very busy.
Yeah. Mindy, how about you? What were you in when you looked back?
Well, it's kind of funny because, again, 4 different high schools. I started out, I played the flute. I think, Julie, you played the flute too, didn't you?
Right, yeah, that's what I played in band.
Yes, so I played the flute and I was involved in band. My freshman year, I went out for marching band, and I remember hating the uniform. And you guys can so appreciate this now. So I quit marching band and I became a cheerleader after that because the uniform was way cuter.
That was the worst part of band.
It was because we still had the helmet, I call it a helmet. We had the hats with like the big plume. And I'm like, this is not attractive at all. I cannot continue to wear this through the rest of my high school years.
You had hair at homecoming.
It was awful. I couldn't take the hat off and it itched. And I'm like, I was too tall for my uniform. Like, it was total not the look I wanted to go for. So I was vain enough that I quit that and continued to play the flute in high school, but became a cheerleader. And I was very active in sports, but not so much in high school. So I played on a co-ed softball team, always through my church. My dad was always coaching that, which was a lot of fun. But in my yearbook, I joined the French club because I thought that sounded super cool. And I was taking French, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I was in that. I was really involved in my youth group at church. So pretty much anything the youth group at church was doing, I was there. Mission trips through high school that we took and things like that. other than that, I mean, I hung out with friends. So I never had the grades that Julie did for sure. Though I passed. I just never cared about it as much.
Yeah.
If I had gotten a 96, I'd been like, awesome. Because I never wanted to spend time on school outside of school.
Right. Yeah, I would definitely say that school came pretty easy to me. I didn't need to study really, maybe for the odd test here or there or spend some time writing a paper, but it wasn't something that I had to stress over. But I did go back and look in the yearbooks, and I forgot that I was in the ski club. I forgot I was on student council. I actually don't even remember what my role was. I am in the picture, and I didn't read it close enough to see if it listed the roles, but I completely forgot I was on student council. Maybe somebody from my high school is listening to this, and they can message us on what I actually was. I was in the National Honor Society. I did run track, if you can believe it, because I absolutely hate track, and I was not one of the good runners. No. One thing about our school was that the only thing I think that was competitive to even get on was basketball, maybe softball, cheerleading. I was a cheerleader at one point, but it was not competitive to get into tennis. So I actually learned to play tennis in high school from my coach. And I was looking through my yearbooks, and I actually won like the county singles title my senior year, which seems really weird. And I had kind of forgotten about that. But Julie and I have played tennis, and I'm sure she's thinking, really, Marie? Because I cannot picture that.
No, we had fun playing tennis.
Yeah, we did have fun. But that was actually something, in a small town, a lot of times you can actually learn the sport from the school. Where my kids go to high school, if you are not a rock star by the time you try out, you don't even have a shot. So
True.
So yeah, it's kind of funny. It might sound funny to listeners to be able to do that. Well, I know that we each graduated in a different year, and we went to high school. Even though Julie and I were both in the 80s, we were at different portions of the 80s. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what was going on in the world while we were in high school. So what was going on for you, Julie? What years were you in high school? What were the 4 years?
So I started in 1980, graduated in 1984. Ronald Reagan was president. And I had to look up some of this. I have a little memories book that came with my class ring. If you remember, you got this little package.
I have that too, Julie, and I found it yesterday.
I did too. So I looked through there, and there's a little page for what was going on in the world. These were some things that I had written down. There was an assassination attempt on President Reagan. The AIDS virus was identified the year I graduated. Sally Ride was the first woman in space, and she happened to be from Memphis, my hometown. The Iran hostage crisis was going on, and I just remember that being really scary. I think it lasted for 2 years. I am a big fan of the Olympics, so I remember the Summer Olympics were in LA, and the Winter Olympics were in Lake Placid. And I remember that was when the U.S. men's hockey team beat the Russians.
Oh.
And that was like the greatest sports moment of the 20th century.
Is that the one that Miracle is based on?
And they called that event the Miracle on Ice. So yeah, I watched that game. And so that was what was going on.
All right. Well, I was next in line because I was in high school from 86 to 90. So even though this happened right before I went to high school, it happened in January of 86. I still think it was a defining moment for our generation was the Challenger explosion. So that happened actually when I was in 8th grade, but I just think it kind of it kind of touches off those years for me in my mind, and then I actually had to go back and look back on what else happened. And there were lists of things that had happened, and I'll tell you the ones that I actually could remember. Chernobyl. The Oprah Winfrey Show started, which in my mind had been going on for years before that, but apparently that started in September of 86, so right when I was starting high school. And the quintessential memory of my mom growing up is that she would come home every day after work, she was a teacher, and sit down and watch Oprah. I thought she must have been doing that my whole life, but apparently it only happened in high school.
Oh, wow.
She was watching Phil Donahue before that.
She definitely was watching Phil Donahue.
How funny.
From 1987, the only thing on the list that they had that I really remembered in real time was the movie Dirty Dancing coming out. I did not remember the world events that were going on. Let's see. And that was actually a big year. That included Ronald Reagan's Tear Down This Wall speech, but I don't remember any of it. Let's see. 1998, I do remember the presidential election between Bush and Dukakis because I think I must have been in government class then and we had to watch the debates. And I'm thinking that's probably where he said his infamous statement, "Read my lips, no new taxes," which definitely came back to haunt him. 1989, the only big story I remembered was, and I'm going to stumble over this, Tiananmen Square. Is that how you say it?
Oh.
The student uprising in Tiananmen Square in China. So that was really the only thing I remembered out of the list then. And then in 1990, I remembered the start of the Gulf War, which happened just after I graduated. So really, when I think about it, I did not remember a lot about world events. And I know that my kids could, if they met me in high school, they would think I was from Little House on the Prairie or something with the level of knowledge I had about the world because they are so much more informed. They can talk circles around old me in politics and world events and worldviews and it's just so funny that how much more I think informed probably high schoolers are today. That's what really struck me reading the
That
list.
is really true. Yeah. I don't like the Iran hostage crisis. I remember hearing it, but I had no idea what it was about. None.
Right.
No clue could I even explain that at all. And I think that's why I grew up under the shadow of the Cold War. That was a constant fear. So any Cold War themed movie or book, I'm just naturally drawn to because I think it explains a time of my life that I didn't really understand, but I was aware of.
Yeah. It's funny, Julie, because in my memory book, which now that you say it must have come with my class ring, I only had cut out 2 articles from the newspaper, and one of them was the Cold War. The Cold War is over. But honestly, I don't even remember thinking that much about it. I think I was just trying to fill in the page. All right, Mindy.
Yeah, we were not near as aware as our kids.
Yeah. So what was going on for you, Mindy?
Okay, well, I had to actually look up, who was the president when I graduated from high school?
Who was it, Mindy?
Funny, but it was Bill Clinton.
Oh, how could you forget him?
Well, I mean, I remember him.
Right.
But okay, so I went to high school between 1992 and 1996. And so Bill Clinton was the president that I have now remembered. Right. And so actually that year was an election year, and he won his second term in 1996. Let's see. This was fun. DVDs were first launched in 1996, though VHS tapes were still the normal way to watch a movie.
Okay.
Hence Blockbuster Friday nights, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so I actually read one very interesting thing that has really marked my life. I know it's marked Marie's life too, but minivans, they finally started having 2 sliding doors instead of just on the driver's side in 1996. They started opening on both sides.
Wow.
That made life so much better, Mindy, didn't it?
I had no idea when I graduated from high school how much that would, impact my life later on. The 2 sliding doors on the minivan. Oh my goodness. Pop culture was definitely way more exciting for me. We were still, as a country, we were involved in Iran, still in Iraq and Afghanistan. So we still had troops over there. I do remember that. My dad was in the Army, so I was much more aware of where our Army was. But when you look at world events, those were things that obviously I just glossed over. I didn't really, pay much mind. But if you remember the name John Benet Ramsey, the little girl,
yes,
that happened in 1996. Also, since we've talked about The Crown, this is also new news for people now, but I was living it at the time. But Lady Diana and Prince Prince Charles got divorced in 1996.
Okay.
And I feel like they marked my early years because in 1996 they got divorced. And I remember, ironically, I was married in 1997, a year later, and that's when Lady Di was killed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I do remember that, like watching the UK for most of all, like Lady Diana's fashion and stuff like that. I didn't really care.
She was a fascinating figure, Mindy.
Yes, she was. Yes, she was. She stopped feathering her hair back and she started wearing it down, which was a little more popular.
Uh-huh.
So those are kind of the main things that I remember and, happening, I guess, during those years. So I'll be able to be much more knowledgeable on the pop culture part of it, but
Right. Well, speaking of your style and hair and all that, Mindy, why don't you start us off with what was your style and like maybe some of your brands that you enjoyed?
My goodness, how much time do we have? I remember, first of all, waking up at 5:30 every morning so I could take a full shower, blow dry my hair, and I had the quintessential cheap curling iron that probably everyone had. It was everyone had the same kind of curling iron. I remember that. And I would curl my bangs under, and I had bangs. Of course, you had to have bangs. And my hair was pretty long. And I would curl the ends under and curl my bangs under. And that was the hairstyle.
Yeah.
No more teased bangs. That was when I was in like late elementary school and maybe early middle
That was
school.
when I was in high school.
Okay. So, oh my goodness. So I loved my Doc Martens shoes. They were like the Mary Jane style. And I remember saving up for these Doc Marten baby doll shoes. But the chunky heels, the chunky boots, anything from the Gap was total 90s. Birkenstocks were a thing, but I couldn't afford them. So I remember having fake Birkenstocks, which I love.
There's still fake Birkenstocks today, Mindy.
You know what? That's where I'm at, is the fake Birkenstocks. And do you remember the brand Esprit?
Yes, I do.
Okay, that was really popular. And then I also remember so the movie Clueless had come out. I loved wearing like short A-line skirts and over-the-knee socks with my Mary Jane Doc Marten baby doll shoes.
Okay.
But then there was also a stage in there, if you remember the store Express, long floral skirts came out and like dresses. And that was totally me. So if you look at the Friends show and you see like the slip dresses that the girls wore or the long floral skirts, I totally rocked that too. Love.
Yeah, I loved that style. That's when I was getting married.
I would still wear that.
Yeah.
And I would still A-line skirts too if I wasn't 40. And then Bath and Body Works kind of came out. And so like the body lotions and stuff and the scented floral sprays, that was definitely the smells that I was wearing.
Okay. You are so detailed, Mindy. I would definitely recognize an 80s style if someone said like, is this from the 80s, 90s, whatever. I would totally say like, oh yeah, we wore that. But I can't remember exactly like brands or exactly what I was doing. It's funny though, because I will say that I have two juniors in high school, and we went shopping at Urban Outfitters a few weeks ago. And I thought, man, a lot of these things look a lot like what I wore in high school.
Yes.
And so it's so funny how what comes around goes around. But Julie, maybe you have more specifics to share in that area.
My style was definitely ridiculously preppy.
Okay.
I had gone to a public school until middle school, and then I went to a private Christian school that was about half an hour away from my house. It was a sacrifice for my parents to put me there, but since I was an only child, it was possible. But the school was in a very nice part of town, like old money Memphis, and so a lot of the kids there were very wealthy. So it was. This is a part of me that I'm glad I'm not there anymore, because I was very much all about looking like everybody else and having the right brands. And that was probably the hardest thing about going to school there, was wanting to keep up with all of that, and yet, it was really too expensive. But we wore plaid wool skirts, long knee socks, penny loafers. This sounds so ancient, but
I love penny loafers.
lots of plaid. Shoes, I remember we called them topsiders. They're kind of like the Sperry's now,
Yes.
with the white sole, and that was really popular. Oxford cloth shirts, wool sweaters, tree torn tennis shoes. Do you remember those?
I do.
Yeah, I just bought a pair actually because I loved them so much then.
Yes.
Guess jeans were really popular, and then Izods were really popular. We didn't call them Lacoste; they were Izod then. Long Bermuda shorts, usually wool with knee socks. I remember there were lots of monogrammed things. Like, do you remember those purses with the wood handles, and then you could button on the different covers?
Mm-hmm.
You remember those?
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, yes.
Those are really popular. And then also those belt buckles. They were like seashells or whales that were brass. And then they had the interchangeable colored belts. Did y'all have those?
I don't remember.
Those were super popular. And then this was the frustrating part. I remember you could watch what one or two girls wore. They could have worn the most ridiculous thing. And then within a week, everybody in the school was wearing that.
Oh.
And one of the things was Dickies painter's pants. Do you remember?
I mean,
they still
remember
make those. Painters
Yeah.
wear those. Okay.
Mhm.
Right.
So that became a huge trend. And I remember my mom thinking, now we're buying what? We're buying painter's pants at Ace Hardware? But that was what was in it. It's just so funny how a few girls could set that trend,
That's probably
Yes.
still true today.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I wore Lauren perfume in that little square red bottle. I loved that perfume. So.
Yes.
Okay.
Maria, I was going to say, I used to study the 17 magazine, the makeup
yes.
tips, the hair, the clothes. And I was I tried to do all of that stuff. I could even tell you, do you remember the makeup was in the browns? That was in the 90s. I remember it was a reddish brown and everything was taupe or auburn colored. So
I hadn't thought about 17 magazine until you mentioned it.
I do remember 17 magazine and reading it, but I was not obsessed by the makeup. I was more interested in the relationship articles, the quizzes, anything like that.
That is so funny. I was all about the fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about hair because I was a little bit more into hair. And I will say that I fully subscribe to the mantra, less is more now. But when it came to the late 80s, nobody did. Everybody thought more was more. And so that was the era of perms, big, gigantic teased bangs, and lots of hairspray. The more layers, the better. The more bangs, the better. The more curls, the better. It just was the more was in.
I remember I started off high school with the kind of layered, feathered look, and my hair was straight. But then by the end of high school, the perm was there, and I had big hair with the help of that perm every 3 months. I mean, can't imagine the damage that was being done to my hair.
Oh my goodness.
Well, maybe I can be thankful that my high school years did not include that. I was past that at that point, and
good for you.
The sleek hair was in. So,
Yes. Well, let's move on to music. And I had kind of forgotten about music, but Julie, why don't you start with what kind of music you listen to?
Well, I was definitely into pop music. I really liked Hall & Oates.
Yes,
I think one of their big songs that year was Kiss on my list.
Mm-hmm.
I loved Lionel Richie, Chicago.
Yes.
I think Hard to Say I'm Sorry came out the year I graduated. The Police, Every Breath You Take.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Jackson was huge.
Yeah.
Billie Jean, Beat It. Phil Collins.
Mm-hmm.
Men at Work, Down Under.
Yeah.
And REO Speedwagon.
Okay.
And those were all my favorites. And I remember being introduced to Amy Grant my junior year. And I think her Straight Ahead album came out, the one with the big traffic light on it.
Oh.
So Christian music was just kind of starting to become popular. Well, not even popular. It was coming out. But I was really a fan of pop music.
Yeah, a lot of those are very familiar to me, and I liked them too. But by the time I got to high school, it seemed like, I don't know, the people that I hung out with, there was a lot of hard rock and like the heavy metal hair bands like Aerosmith and Guns N' Roses and Bon Jovi and Metallica and Poison and all that kind of stuff. And then I loved Madonna, Michael Jackson. I also went to a lot of concerts. Again, this wasn't music that I would have probably chosen for myself, but the people I hung out around loved these. So I was looking at my senior memory book, and I had a lot of concert stub tickets. And the concerts I went to are music that I just do not even listen to now. But Neil Young, apparently I went and saw him. The Rolling Stones, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Like, these are not people that I ever turn on, but I guess they must have been touring in our local area. And I remember my parents saying, "These are people that we listen to. What are you going to say that for?"
Oh, wow.
But anyways, there was a great variety of music. And I think it's funny that I live in Nashville now because my dad always listened to country. I can still remember the country radio station in the garage when he would be working on something. So I also knew a lot of country songs just from that. And I think it's funny when I live in Nashville now and know all those songs. So
yeah, I didn't. My parents did listen to country, so I was familiar with it, but it wasn't my favorite. I did find some concert tickets in my little book, and it was there was one from Chicago, the Beach Boys, Survivor, Eye of the Tiger.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh my god!
I'm embarrassed about this one, Joan Jett.
I went to see Joan Jett too. She was in mine, yes.
And then REO Speedwagon. So there we go.
This is like so nostalgic for me because I remember I actually dated this guy that I thought he was super cool because he liked vintage music. He liked old music because he listened to Chicago, REO Speedwagon.
That's funny.
So we're your oldies. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that was my oldies.
Well, apparently our senior class had a music motto, and it was, "Can't touch this," which everybody remembers that song.
I love that
Who sang that?
I think it was MC Hammer, wasn't it?
Oh.
Yeah.
Can't touch this. Oh. I loved the music so much. All of the stuff I would still listen to today. But Christian music was on the rise, Julie, because two of my favorite artists during that time, I remember having debates with people in my youth group. Do you like Stephen Curtis Chapman or Michael W. Smith? And it was like Twyla Paris was out, and I actually really liked Twyla Paris. Point of Grace came out. That was like a big deal when Point of Grace came out, the four women that sang. But Wilson Phillips was also the three ladies that sang. I loved their music. But my all-time favorite high school memories, first of all, other than the Christian music, is I listened to all kinds of music. But my favorite group was the Cranberries. Loved.
I've never heard of them, Mindy. Are they famous?
Okay,
yes. I did not know them.
I loved the Cranberries so much. And Alanis Morissette came out.
Oh, okay.
And do you remember Alanis Morissette?
Mm-hmm.
Her storytelling was amazing. I almost said ironic, but that's actually one of her songs is ironic. But between the Cranberries, Alanis Morissette, Stephen Curtis Chapman, and Michael W. Smith, oh my goodness.
All right, well, let's talk about movies of our high school. Julie, why don't you start us off? What movies? These are probably movies that Mindy and I watched from the video store later.
Yes, you guys were renting these at Blockbusters, but they came out during my high school years. Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yes, I remember that.
I think two of them. The Superman with Christopher Reeves.
Okay.
He was one of my celebrity crushes. E.T. I think two of the Star Wars movies came out then. Because I remember, I think it was Return of the Jedi, Ghostbusters, and one of my all-time favorites was Footloose.
Okay.
Oh,
yes.
wow.
Yes. All those movies. What about TV shows, Julie? Did you have any favorites?
Okay. My all-time favorite TV show was Family Ties with Michael J. Fox.
I loved Family Ties.
Oh, it was so good. I just thought Michael J. Fox's character was so funny.
Mm-hmm.
That was my favorite. But then I don't even know if you guys will know this show, but it was called Trapper John, MD.
Yes, I remember it. Was it an hour or a half hour?
It was an hour show.
Okay.
And my celebrity crush was Gregory Harrison from that show. And he played this young, hip resident doctor.
Oh.
And he was nicknamed Gonzo. And he lived in his RV in the hospital parking lot.
I do vaguely remember that now. Isn't it funny? Do you feel like you married a young, hip medical resident?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
And I was a fan. I was a member of his fan club. And I have a signed glossy print of Gregory Harrison to prove it.
He was cute.
He was very cute. And I was also, this doesn't fit with TV, but I had athlete crushes. I was into sports.
Okay.
And I watched sports back then. I watched football and I watched tennis. I watched baseball. The Racquet Club of Memphis used to hold the U.S. National Indoors every year. And I had friends who were members because of the high school that I went to. So they would always invite me along. And I got to meet Bjorn Borg, Jimmy Connors, John McEnroe. So I've got their autograph.
Who wouldn't have crushes on all of them?
Yeah. And they were, the club was small. So they would just kind of be seen walking around the club between matches and stuff. So that was always fun to get to go. And
yeah. All right. Well, let's see. Movies that came out. These are not in any particular order. I loved Pretty Woman. That actually came out when I was a senior. Ghost came out. Everybody remembers the scene between Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore. Dirty Dancing, like I said before. Teen classics like Pretty in Pink and 16 Candles. TV shows. Did you guys remember Moonlighting?
Oh, yes.
I loved Moonlighting. I think that came out on
She
Tuesday
was also
night.
from Memphis. What was her name?
Sybil Shepherd?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
And that was with Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd. That was before Bruce Willis made it big, I think, in the movies.
Yeah.
And then I think right after that on Tuesday nights, that was like my favorite night of the week. 30-something came on, my all-time favorite show, and that was on when I was in high school. Sitcoms, those were really popular in the 80s, and there were some great ones like The Cosby Show, Family Ties, Growing Pains. Who did not have a crush on Kirk Cameron? I mean, seriously.
Yep.
Who's the Boss? Silver Spoons. There were so many good TV sitcoms, and Mindy, you may have watched those in reruns later when you were in high school.
Some of those.
Yeah. All right. Well, what was popular for movies and TV when you were in high school, Mindy?
Let's see. All right. So I mentioned earlier Clueless came out. And so that definitely shaped the fashion of my day. Dangerous Minds was a big movie that came out. Encino Man. Did you guys ever see Encino Man?
I remember the name, but I don't think I saw it.
I loved that movie so much. I'm embarrassed to say. Dumb and Dumber came out. If you remember those.
That.
We got a little dumber in the 90s. Like there was some of the humor, which I thought was hilarious. Bryce said he used to like watching it just to watch me laugh. But Home Alone was coming out. And then when it came to actually TV, Beverly Hills 90210 was a big show that came out. And I remember it was very controversial. I was not allowed to watch it. That was another thing that I would try to sneak and watch because I had a huge crush on Jason Priestley. He was one of the main characters. I definitely had a crush on Brendan Fraser from Encino Man. I thought he was so cute. But My So-Called Life came out with Jared Leto, and I thought Jared Leto was like the epitome of the 90s man. Like he was just the cutest 90s guy ever. Oh, one of my favorite movies came out that I would still watch today, While You Were Sleeping with Sandra Bullock.
Yes, love that movie.
One of my favorites.
Yes. So that came out. Let's see. Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman was on, if you remember that. And I loved watching Saved by the Bell reruns. Came out a little bit before I was in high school, but I loved watching Saved by the Bell. And that was actually an approved show that I could watch at home. So that was good.
All right.
It's funny because in that time of life, I was young, married, in pharmacy school, and then in 92 had Molly. So it's funny. Most of those things, I have no idea what you're talking about. Because I was so in another world by then, you know?
Yes, yes.
funny.
Do you remember? Oh, Seventh Heaven.
I was going to
also
say
big.
Seventh Heaven.
Yes.
That came out when Abigail was a baby, and Steve and I used to watch it every week. Loved
I
that
love.
show. Well, what are some of your favorite hangout spots or places to eat?
Well, it seems strange now, but we hung out a lot in arcades, which is so weird.
Oh,
That was a big place to hang out and meet people or in the parking lot. I remember on the main street near my school, there was an old gas station they had converted to an arcade. So it still had the little covered area where the pumps were, and that's where people just mingled outside. You would go through McDonald's, get your food, and then go to the arcade. There was a mall in town that had a huge ice rink inside the mall, an indoor rink. So
wow.
I probably went there every single weekend to ice skate. Blockbuster was a big one. We renting VHS movies. We had a Swenson's ice cream. That was a popular place. And Putt Putt was really big in the summer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
How about you, Mindy?
Well, definitely, going to Blockbuster, renting movies was a really big deal. Football games at high school was the big thing to do during football season. Basketball games. I mean, really any sport.
For sure the sports you could definitely hang out.
We were always looking for a place to go. Like something to do. If I had lived near a mall, the mall would have been the hangout. Later in high school, we had to drive an hour and a half. So that was a big deal to go to the mall. But anything the youth group was doing, I was there and I was inviting all of my friends. And so the youth group would always try to do, things at the church or outside of the church. And so I was all about that. Other than that, it was friend's house, driving around, driving around.
Seems like there was a lot of driving around.
Yes.
We were blasting music and driving around, and we Taco Bell was the place to go after football games. So the big Taco Bell, that was one of my favorite places to eat. I remember.
Right. All right. Well, some of the things that Francie wanted to know real quick, let's rattle them off. She wanted to know what kind of car we drove. Julie, what kind of car did you drive?
Well, I started off on our family car, which was a green Honda Accord.
Okay.
And then I did get my own car, and I got a Honda Prelude. So it was a fancy car.
Is a Prelude, what was that, kind of like a Civic?
No, it was their sports car. It was two-door sports car. Okay. I don't even think they make it anymore.
Yeah. So. Okay. Yeah. Well, neat. I actually did not have a car till I was a senior in college. But I had a lot of friends that had cars right away in high school, so they would always pick me up and drive me around. I never really had a need of a car until I was going to start student teaching, and then my parents bought me one. So, but that was a Ford Tempo. So I don't know if you guys remember the Ford Tempo. And it was a stick shift, which my dad bought. It was when you would just look at an ad in the paper, drive an hour and a half, buy this car, basically sight unseen. It was a stick shift. He said, "This is your car, Marie." I probably drove it for a few weeks before I really even knew how to back up. I mean, it was a huge learning curve. Yeah. And he just sent me out there on the road in it.
Yeah, my first car was a stick shift, and I said, "You're going to have to return this because it's not working." It took me a while, like a couple of weeks to get it down.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, brings back memories. All right. I was really rocking it out. The first vehicle I had, my dad owned this 1970s Ford truck, Ford Ranger. It was a diesel 4-speed.
Oh, wow.
So it was stick shift, but it was old enough. It only went up to 4. And so my dad and I have some really hilarious stories about me learning to drive that old Ford truck. But I drove that for a couple of years. And then when I was a senior in high school, it's so funny, Marie, you mentioned the Ford Tempo, because my parents were buying a second car and they kind of let me pick it out because I was going to drive it to high school. And it was the Mercury Sable. It was the
kind of
Mercury version of the Ford Tempo. So it looked exactly like the Ford Tempo. And it was white, but mine was automatic.
Okay.
And so I did learn on a stick shift, but thankfully upgraded to an automatic. And I loved that little car.
Oh, well, that's awesome. She wanted to know what our prom dresses looked like. So I actually did look back at my pictures. I guess I went to 3 proms. I don't remember if, because it was a small school, just anyone in 9th through 12th could go to the proms, or if I was asked to go as a sophomore. I don't remember. But I have 3 pictures of myself. So I have a long light blue dress, that my mother loved. I think to this day, she would like me to still own and wear that dress. Then I had a short peach dress the next year, which I really liked, probably out of the three of them the best. And then when I was a senior, I guess I must have been going for compromise approach, because what are those dresses called that are short in the front and longer in the back?
High-low.
Oh, high-low.
Yeah.
It was a high-low dress. And I will say that out of the three of them, the high-low is the worst. It did not stand the test of time. How about you, Julie? What'd your prom dresses look like?
We didn't have proms. So,
okay.
Because we were at a small Christian school.
Okay.
So we had banquets.
Okay.
Oh, it's funny.
And were any of those dresses anything that you want to remember?
No.
Okay. Mindy,
Oh,
what did
my
your prom
goodness.
dresses look like?
Okay. Well, my junior year, I was homeschooled, so no prom.
Okay.
My senior year, I had two dressy dresses, though, because I went to
Mm.
homecoming and then I went to prom. So
Okay.
the homecoming dress, fun fact, that was mine and Bryce's first date.
Oh.
So I actually have a picture of us at homecoming, and I loved that dress. I actually got it at JCPenney's. It was a black sleek dress, and it had like the high neck with the
Mhm.
open shoulder,
Okay.
and it was more form fitting, but it stopped at my calves, and
Uh-huh.
then it had the front slit in it, and it had like a
okay.
thin
Mhm.
rhinestone band around the neck.
Mm-hmm.
It was very cute.
Fancy.
And then this is the coolest thing, but my Aunt Jenny is this masterful seamstress, and I wanted this dress for prom, and she made it for me. She actually made it. She lived in Illinois and mailed it to us down in Missouri. I lived in Missouri at the time. See, I can't even remember. I had a hunter green strapless, sleeveless dress, and it had like the sweetheart, shape at the bust line, and it was fitted and went to a point and was really pleated and had a long skirt on it. That was my prom dress.
Wow.
So of course hunter green, because that was the 90s, was like hunter green and burgundy and stuff like that.
Yes.
So I also have a picture. Bryce was my prom date again. And
Okay.
so I have that picture as well.
Well, we'll have to post
That's
those,
neat.
Mindy.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about how, and we've mentioned this today, about how high school is different today than it was then. But what do you guys think about your own kids' high school experiences versus yours? What do you think about when you think about high school? Julie, you've had kids go through high school, but in a little different form. Did you notice a lot of differences just about who you were and who they are?
Yeah, and their high school experience was different because they were homeschooled. They were a part of a tutorial, so they were with other kids weekly, but they definitely were not caught up in the having to look like everybody else. My kids just didn't care necessarily what everybody else was doing. They
Mhm.
didn't, as far as fashion and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just kind of the nature of the group of kids that they were with. So I thought that was neat that they were kind of free from that,
Mm-hmm.
because that was a part of my high school years that I kind of regret that
Mm.
that I wasn't an individual. Like it wasn't until college and later that I feel like I became who I was. I was
Mhm.
conforming, and it wasn't in a bad way, but it just still was a lot of wasted time, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So yeah, so in that way, I think their high school was a much better experience. But just thinking back, when you guys were listing like all the world events that were going on in high school, like I don't know, Chernobyl, the space shuttle crash, wars, assassinations. For me, the Cold War, Vietnam War, Iran hostages. I think we tend to look back on times and just remember the good places and think that the world is so dark and scary now,
Mhm.
but it wasn't then. And that just kind of
Mhm.
reminded me that the world's probably just the same
Right.
Mm-hmm.
back then, today as back then. We just tend to remember the good stuff and minimize the bad. But just thinking about all that, I mean, because I remember having drills at school for nuclear attacks. And there were signs on buildings like these
Oh,
are safe
wow.
shelter places you could go in the event of an attack. And I just remember seeing videos of that big mushroom cloud and thinking, oh, what if it happened here and I wasn't with my parents? Like it was a very fearful time for me. John said he didn't remember it that way, but for some reason that just really stuck with me. It was just a shadow over that time. So I think the world probably was just as scary a place back then. And it's encouraging to know that life does go on and you have kids. And, because I think a lot of people today think, I don't want to have kids because the world is such a terrible place. But life does go on and lots of good stuff yet to come.
Rest assured, kids, it's always been terrible.
Yeah, but I mean, there's always been evil and sin in the world, but there's good in the world and life goes on and you have a lot to look forward to.
Absolutely.
Even though the world is scary.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was thinking about how different it is. I think that I was very sheltered as far as knowing what was going on outside my own little world. Because we didn't really see the news unless there was like a news bulletin on the radio or anyone actually wanted to sit down and watch the news or read a newspaper. You really didn't absorb all that you do now with 24-hour news stations and, just all the stuff that we have, the internet and everything else. And I think also what's different is that we just didn't have as many opportunities as kids have today. When I was looking at college, we had to actually go to our guidance counselor, and he had like books in his office of possible colleges. And that's how you found out maybe what your choices were. And so if you didn't have a good guidance counselor, maybe you didn't even know there were choices for you out there. There wasn't things that you could look up on the internet. If you hadn't traveled to a lot of other places, you might not even know about different places that you could live or colleges that you could go to or career choices. Like there just was not as much access to information. And so I think that is a huge difference in myself and my own kids as far as just how much more information they have about the world and about people and about opportunities and what you could do. And we just didn't have all that.
Well, I remember world conflicts directly affected my life because my dad was in the Army. So early in high school, my dad was actually in Afghanistan. And I remember him coming home one day and life was normal. And he said, I'm flying out today and I don't know how long I'll be gone and I don't know when I'll be back. And so that was one of the scariest moments of my life. And so I don't currently live with a service member, and our children weren't shaped by military conflicts in my home. And so I remember being much more aware and it touched our everyday life, and then we were always in military communities, even though we may not have lived on post. In my later high school years, a lot of my friends' parents were in the military. We had all lived a lot of places. We had all experienced a lot of different types of cultures and people, and we'd had a lot of people that had lived in Europe and lived overseas and, things like that. And so ironically, I feel like my children's high school years were more even sheltered in a sense because they weren't directly affected by having an active service member as one of their parents. At the same time, they were able to have cell phones. There was a different kind of stress. So I'm thankful that cell phones didn't come out until later. You mentioned that earlier, Marie. The whole social media thing, was out there with my kids. And so for them, it was developing your own boundaries with having the access to everything. Whereas me, it was just the things that, directly affect your parents or your siblings. So I don't know that I would say that it was any less stressful or I don't know. It's just my experience was so different from my children's.
Yeah. High school experiences certainly are different now, and they'll be different when our kids have kids in high school. They might be like the Jetsons by then and have spaceships. Who knows? My one son is convinced there'll be self-driving cars. I mean, we don't know what will be out there for them. Maybe they won't even have to worry about their kids driving, which is a huge stressor for us because they'll have self-driving cars. Well, listeners, we hope that you enjoyed this discussion. And Francie, our lovely caller, we hope that you've enjoyed this discussion too. Listeners, we would love for you to call with any questions you have. This was so fun to get a topic idea from a listener, and you can get in contact with us at 209 Midlife, 209-643 5433-209-MIDLIFE. Leave us a voicemail. If you just want us to take your topic idea and not play it on the air, just say, please don't play this on the air, and we won't have to. But I think it's fun to hear the actual voice and hear their expression when they ask the question, if possible.
Yeah. Thanks, Francie, for the idea.
Yeah.
So fun, Francie. Thanks so much.
Yeah. And so I'll put a link to our phone number in our show notes. Also, if you want to email us any topic ideas, it's midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. Julie and Mindy, I loved hearing about your high school experiences. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I want to see some good pictures this week.
Me too. I want to see some great pictures of the hair. I love the style, all of it.
All right. We'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Bye.
We're so happy you joined us today. You can find the show notes for this episode at midlifematterspodcast.com. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.